My mother-in-law said it with a champagne glass in her hand and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Relax, everyone, she's only a secretary. The room laughed. My wife just smiled back and said nothing. 3 weeks later, a black government sedan pulled into that same driveway, and a man in a dress uniform asked for her by her full name, rank, and clearance level. My mother-in-law dropped her glass. Let me back up and tell you how we got there. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 34, I teach high school history in a mid-sized town outside Richmond, Virginia, and 6 years ago I married the most quietly extraordinary woman I have ever known. Her name is Claire. When people meet Claire for the first time, they see a woman in her early 30s with tired eyes, sensible shoes, and a habit of checking her phone at odd hours. She doesn't talk much about her job. If you press her, really press her, over dinner, over drinks, at a wedding where the band is too loud and everyone's had 2 glasses of wine too many, she'll give you the same 3 words every single time. I'm an administrative assistant. That's it, that's the whole answer. No department, no title, no details, just the shrug, the smile, the subject change. For years, even I only knew pieces. I knew she worked for the Department of Defense. I knew she traveled sometimes, sudden trips, 48 hours notice, gone for a week, home with jet lag and a look in her eyes like she'd seen weather systems the rest of us hadn't. I knew she had a badge she never let out of a locked drawer in our home office, and I knew better than to ask about it, because the one time I did, early in our relationship, her whole body changed. Not angry. Just closed. Like a door swinging, shut on a room I wasn't cleared to enter. Dan, she'd said, I love you, and I will tell you everything I'm allowed to tell you, which is almost nothing. Can you live with that? I did. For 6 years, I lived with a woman I loved completely and understood only partially, and somewhere along the way I stopped needing the rest of the picture. Claire was Claire. She made terrible coffee and perfect pancakes. She cried at dog commercials and stayed dry-eyed at funerals because, she once told me, grief hits her late, in private, on her own schedule. She was, in every way that mattered to our actual life together, just my wife. To my mother, Claire was a wonder, quiet, kind, whip-smart, endlessly patient with my dad's bad jokes. To my mother-in-law, Vivian Ashford Cole, Claire was a disappointment wrapped in a paycheck. You need to understand Vivian to understand what happened at that dinner. Vivian Ashford Cole did not marry into money, she married into old money, the kind with a hyphen and a family crest somewhere in a box she'd mention at parties. Her late husband, Claire's father, had been a 2-star general before a heart attack took him at 61, and Vivian had spent the 20 years since perfecting the art of being a general's widow. She sat on boards. She lunched with senators' wives. She had opinions about flatware. And she had 2 daughters. The older one, Margaret, was a federal judge's law clerk on a fast track to something impressive, engaged to a cardiologist, always photographed at the right galas in the right dress. The younger one, Claire, had gone into the military herself, ROTC in college, a few years of active duty nobody in the family discussed much, and had come out the other side into what Vivian understood to be a desk job. Paperwork. Filing. A government cubicle with fluorescent lighting and a lanyard. Vivian had never once asked Claire what she actually did. Not because she wasn't curious. Vivian was curious about everything, in the specific way people are curious about things they intend to use as ammunition, but because she had already decided the answer didn't matter. Claire was the daughter who didn't sparkle, the daughter who came to family dinners quiet and left early. The daughter Vivian had, at some point, silently filed under settled, meaning settled for less, settled into obscurity, settled for a schoolteacher husband and a secretarial job in a beige office park somewhere off the Beltway. I want to be fair to Vivian, because this isn't really a villain story, not entirely. She loved her daughters. She was, in her own brittle way, proud of Margaret to the point of suffocation, and I think some of what she directed at Claire wasn't cruelty so much as disappointment misfiled as concern. She wanted more for Claire. She just never once considered that Claire might already have more than anyone at that table could imagine, and simply wasn't allowed to say so. That's the tragedy underneath the comedy of what happened next. Vivian wasn't laughing at a secretary. She was laughing at a woman she had never actually met. The dinner was for Margaret's engagement, a big one, 40-some guests at Vivian's house in McLean, catering staff in black V. Ests, a string quartet warming up in the corner of a living room the size of my entire childhood house. Claire and I had driven up from Richmond that afternoon, and I remember she'd been quiet in the car, staring out the window with her phone in her lap, screen dark, like she was waiting for it to do something. "You okay?" I'd asked. "Just a lot going on at work this week," she said, and left it there, the way she always did. The party was in full swing by 7. Vivian worked the room like a stage, champagne flute in hand, introducing Margot's fiancé to anyone who'd stand still long enough. Claire and I found a corner near the hors d'oeuvres and mostly stayed out of the current, which was, honestly, how we liked these things. It was Vivian's cousin, a booming man named Ted with a Rolex and a habit of asking everyone's salary in different words, who cornered us around 8. Claire, been ages, still over at the Pentagon or wherever it is. "Still there," Claire said, smiling politely. "Doing what again? Filing? Scheduling?" Ted laughed, not unkindly, just carelessly, the way people laugh when they've already decided a subject is boring. I always forget. And that's when Vivian, gliding past with a fresh glass of champagne, caught the tail end of it and couldn't resist. "Oh, Ted, don't embarrass her." Vivian smiled, that smile, the one that looked warm from across the room and felt like a blade up close. "She's only a secretary, aren't you, darling?" She reached over and patted Claire's arm, the way you'd pat a child who'd tried and failed at something. "It's a very stable job. Good benefits, I imagine." The little cluster of relatives around them laughed, not cruelly, just the easy laugh of people agreeing with a joke that confirms what they already believed. Someone said something about job security. Someone else asked if Claire got federal holidays off. Margot, to her credit, shot Claire an apologetic look across the room, but she didn't say anything either. I felt my jaw tighten. I opened my mouth to say something, I don't even know what, some defensive husband reflex, and Claire's hand found my arm under the table. Not gripping, just resting there, a signal. "Let it go." So I did, and Claire smiled and said, something like that, and took a sip of her water, and the conversation moved on to Margot's wedding venue. And nobody at that table had any idea that the woman they'd just laughed at held a security clearance that outranked every single person in that room combined, including the 2-star general's widow at its head. I only found that out 3 weeks later, and so, in a much bigger way, did Vivian. Before I tell you about the sedan in the driveway, I have to tell you what I eventually learned. Not all at once, not in some dramatic confession scene, but in pieces, over months, after the world cracked open, and Claire was finally, partially, allowed to talk. Claire wasn't a secretary. She had never been a secretary. The job title on her badge, the one that showed up on tax documents and insurance forms, and the occasional background check some nosy relative ran, was intentionally, deliberately boring. It was cover. Real cover, the kind built by people whose entire profession is making the interesting look uninteresting. Claire worked in a classified intelligence liaison role bridging the Department of Defense and a joint task force most people have never heard of, and if they did hear of it, would immediately forget, because that's the point. Her actual work involved analyzing and coordinating time-sensitive threat intelligence. The kind of work where a missed detail doesn't mean a bad quarterly report, it means people don't come home. She had spent years building the specific, rare expertise that let her sit in rooms with 3-star generals and hold her own, not because of her rank, but because she was, by a wide margin, the person in the room who understood the problem best. The sudden trips I'd noticed over the years, not conferences, the look in her eyes when she came home, not jet lag exactly, or not only jet lag. The locked drawer in our home office held nothing dramatic, just a badge and a phone that never left that drawer, but what that badge represented was a level of clearance that meant Claire had, at various points in her career, known things about global events before they happened. Not psychically, professionally, it was her job to know. And she had never told a single member of her own family, including her mother, because she legally could not. Not chose not to, could not. The cover story, administrative assistant, boring desk job, nothing to see here, wasn't Claire being modest. It was Claire following federal law and protecting people she loved from a level of exposure they'd never signed up for. Every time Vivian rolled her eyes at the filing job, Claire was, in a very real sense, protecting her mother by letting her keep rolling them. I asked Claire once, much later, if it ever hurt, sitting through years of her mother's quiet condescension, knowing the truth and being unable to say it. She thought about it for a long moment. At first, she said, then I just decided her opinion of my job wasn't the same thing as her opinion of me. I let her have the first one. I kept the second one for myself. That's Claire, that's who I married. 3 weeks after the engagement dinner, something shifted at Claire's job. I could feel it before I understood it. She started coming home later. Her phone, usually silent through dinner, began buzzing constantly, and she'd glance at it and her face would do something I'd learned to recognize. A flicker, gone in half a second, replaced by careful neutrality. On a Tuesday night she came home at 9, dropped her bag by the door and said, I need to tell you something, and then I need you to not ask me follow-up questions, because I won't be able to answer them. Okay, I said. I'm going to be gone for a few days. Starting tomorrow, maybe tonight. I don't know exactly when I'll be back. I need you to feed the cat and I need you to not worry, and I need you to understand that if anyone, including my mother, asks where I am, the answer is a work trip. That's true. It's just not the whole truth. I'd had 6 years of practice at this exact moment, so I nodded and made her tea and didn't ask the question sitting right behind my teeth. She left at 11 that night. A car I didn't recognize picked her up, not a taxi, not a rideshare, just a plain government sedan with a driver who didn't say a word to me when I walked her to the curb. She was gone for 5 days. I won't pretend I wasn't scared during those 5 days. I taught my classes. I graded papers. I fed the cat and I did not sleep well and I did not call Vivian because Vivian wasn't the one I wanted to talk to, and also because I genuinely had nothing to tell her that wouldn't have started an interrogation I couldn't finish. What I know now, what Claire was eventually able to tell me, in the flattened, careful language of someone still bound by things I'll never fully see, is that during those 5 days, a fast-moving international security situation required exactly the kind of specialized analysis Claire had spent a decade becoming one of a small handful of people qualified to provide. She was pulled into a secure facility, worked hours I don't want to think about, and was part of a team whose work, in some downstream way I will never get the details of, mattered. Genuinely, materially mattered, to outcomes much larger than our little house in Richmond with its beige carpet and cranky cat. She came home on a Sunday looking like she'd aged a year in 5 days, and she slept for 14 hours, and when she woke up she cried quietly in the bathroom, thinking I couldn't hear for the first time in longer than I could remember. I didn't ask why. I just held her and made the terrible coffee she likes and let her decide when she wanted to talk. That was the week before the sedan showed up at Vivian's house. Here's the part you've been waiting for. It turned out that in the chaos of that week, a piece of correspondence, something official, something that should have gone to a secure facility, had been misrouted. A clerical error, ironically enough, made by someone whose actual job title matched what Vivian assumed Claire's was. It landed, briefly, at a Pentagon liaison office that needed a signature and a verification, and the fastest way to resolve it, given Claire's temporary unavailability while she was still finishing debrief protocols, was for a service member to physically deliver a document to Claire's listed emergency address for signature and verification of identity. That address, because Claire had updated it after we got married, and then, in one of those small domestic ironies, never updated it again after we moved, was still Vivian's house. Ours had been forwarded there for the first year of our marriage while our mail situation got sorted out, and it had simply never been corrected in one particular government system. A tiny bureaucratic thread, the kind that exists in every large institution, that happened to lead directly to Vivian's front porch. So on a Thursday afternoon, while Vivian was hosting her monthly bridge club, a black sedan pulled into her circular driveway, and a Marine Corps officer in dress uniform walked up to her door and asked, with complete formality, whether this was the residence of a woman bearing Claire's full legal name. And then, according to the version I got second-hand from 3 different relatives who were there for bridge club and have never once let a detail improve in the retelling. He asked for her by rank and clearance designation, the kind of phrase that means nothing to a stranger and everything to anyone who's ever worked near a SCIF. Vivian, holding a plate of watercress sandwiches, reportedly said, I'm sorry, there's no one here by that description. My daughter's an administrative assistant. The officer, polite but entirely unmoved, clarified that this was, in fact, the address on file for the individual he was looking for, and that the matter required a signature from a person with the appropriate clearance level to receive it. Which was not, he noted without a flicker of irony, going to be anyone at that bridge table. Vivian's cousin Ted, the same Ted from the engagement dinner, apparently a man who cannot resist inserting himself into any dramatic moment within a 50-foot radius, supposedly said, "Wait, are you talking about Claire? Vivian's Claire, the secretary." The officer, according to every version of this story, gave Ted a look that several witnesses described as carefully professional, and said something to the effect of, "I'm not able to discuss the nature of her position, sir. I just need her signature." Claire, who had been reachable but occupied, got a call, drove over immediately, signed what needed signing in the driveway in about 90 seconds flat, thanked the officer, and turned around to find her mother standing on the porch steps, still holding the plate of watercress sandwiches, staring at her daughter like she'd never seen her before. Because, in the way that actually mattered, she hadn't. I wasn't there for the driveway moment. I heard about it from Claire that night, delivered with the exhausted, slightly bewildered flatness of someone still processing that her two separate worlds had briefly, accidentally touched. But I was there, a week later, for the conversation that followed because Vivian, to her credit, didn't let it drop. She called Claire and asked directly if they could talk. Just the two of them at first, and then Claire asked me to come too, because she said she wanted a witness who loved her and wouldn't let the conversation slide back into old patterns. We sat in Vivian's sunroom, the one with the good light, and Vivian, for maybe the first time in the 6 years I'd known her, didn't say anything for almost a full minute after we sat down. She looked older than usual. Smaller, somehow, in a chair that had always seemed to fit her perfectly. "I'm not going to ask you what happened," Vivian said finally. "I understand you can't tell me. I've been around enough of your father's world to understand what a clearance badge means, even when I don't understand the specifics." She paused. "What I want to know is how long." "How long what?" "How long have you been letting me believe you were nothing, a secretary? How long have you sat at my table and let me pat your hand like you were a child who needed encouragement?" Claire's voice was steady, but I could hear the years underneath it. "Since I took the job, 14 years, Mom, I couldn't tell you. It wasn't a choice I got to make." "But you could have told me it was more, without details. You could have just said, 'Mom, it's more than you think,' and let me." "I did," Claire said quietly. "More than once. You didn't want to hear it because 'more than you think' didn't come with a title you could repeat at your book club. You wanted a story you could tell, not a truth you couldn't verify. So I stopped offering it and I let you have the story that was easier for you. I'm sorry if that hurt you. But I need you to understand, I did that for you as much as for the job. Some of what I carry isn't safe to carry lightly, and I was not going to hand you a single ounce of it, just so you'd stop patting my hand at parties." Vivian was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said something I don't think I'll ever forget, because it was the most honest thing I ever heard her say. "I think," Vivian said slowly, "I decided a long time ago that Margaret was the daughter who mattered publicly, and you were the daughter who mattered privately, and I never questioned whether I had that backwards. I'm ashamed of that. Not because of a badge, Claire, because a mother should know her own daughter's weight in the world without needing a Marine to show up on her porch to prove it to her." I watched Claire's eyes fill, and I watched her decide not to let the tears fall, the same way she decided at that engagement dinner 3 weeks earlier not to let Vivian's laughter land anywhere it could actually hurt her. "I don't need you to be proud of my job, Mom," Claire said. "I never did. I needed you to be proud of me. Those aren't the same thing, and I think you've been mixing them up my whole life." I wish I could tell you Vivian became a different woman overnight, that she started introducing Claire at parties with a knowing little nod, that Ted stopped asking about federal holidays, that every family dinner from that point on came with an undercurrent of hushed respect. That's not how real people work, and it's not what happened. What did happen was smaller, and I think more honest. Vivian stopped making the joke. That was the first thing. The "she's only a secretary" line simply disappeared from her rotation, retired without ceremony. When people at the next family gathering asked what Claire did, Vivian said, "She works for the Department of Defense, and it's not my place to say more than that." Which was, from Vivian, practically a state funeral of respect. She also started asking Claire different questions. Not about the job, she'd learned that lesson, but about Claire. Are you eating enough? Are you sleeping? You look tired, do you need anything? Small things. The things you ask a person you've started to actually see. Margaret, for her part, pulled Claire aside at the next family dinner and said, only half joking, "I've been telling people my sister works in a filing job for 6 years. I feel like an idiot." Claire told her not to worry about it. That was the whole point, after all, that everyone was supposed to feel that way, that Claire had built a life specifically designed to make people feel exactly that, unbothered. Ted still hasn't fully recovered. Every time Claire walks into a room now, he gets this look, like he's recalculating something. I think, deep down, he's a little bit thrilled by it, in the way people get thrilled by proximity to something bigger than their own dinner party small talk. As for Claire, the job went back to being the job, quiet, demanding, mostly invisible, occasionally terrifying in ways I'll never fully understand. She still says administrative assistant to strangers. She still keeps that badge in a locked drawer. The cover story didn't disappear just because her mother finally understood there was more underneath it. But something did shift in our house, and in Vivian's. A kind of respect that didn't need details to exist, that understood, finally, that the quietest person in the room is sometimes quiet for reasons that have nothing to do with having less to say, and everything to do with carrying more than they're allowed to put down. Last month, at a much smaller, much calmer family dinner, Vivian raised a glass, no champagne flute theatrics this time, just an ordinary glass of wine at an ordinary table, and said, to Claire, who has spent this entire family's history being underestimated, and who never once corrected us, because apparently that was never the point. Claire rolled her eyes, embarrassed, the way she always is when attention lands on her instead of past her. But under the table, her hand found mine, the same way it had at that engagement dinner 3 weeks before a Marine showed up on her mother's porch. Except this time it wasn't asking me to let something go. This time it just meant, I told you it would be okay. And it was, not because the Pentagon called her name in front of the whole family, because, eventually, her mother stopped needing them to.